Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 29. Today's guest is someone who uses art and visual communication as a bridge, helping to bring information about sustainability to others in an accessible and easily understandable way. Rebecca Roberts works in graphic recording. Her job is to capture what is said at conferences and workshops, distilling it into its most essential points, showing connections between key ideas, and putting all this down using words and pictures live in real time. I'm absolutely blown away by the way she does this, and I'm looking forward to sharing this interview with you. Rebecca talks about her background and how she came to this work, how visual communication brings people together, and also she gives tips about how we can bring some of the elements of graphic recording and sketchnoting into our nature journals. Let's listen. Rebecca, thank you so much for being here with me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for having me.
So I normally start my interviews with chatting about early nature experiences, and you made a post online about a poem you wrote when you were 10 years old called Song of the Rhino, and it was all about humans and how humans exploit animals and the tragedy of that. So clearly, even as a child, you were connected with nature and had a strong environmental consciousness. Do you remember when and how that all started for you? What sparked this environmental awareness for you as a child?
Yeah, my mum found that poem around 2 months ago, dragged it out from...
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It was a really powerful poem.
Thank you. I've definitely lost my poetic ability over the years. It's interesting because I think that as a young girl, I have to admit I didn't have that many friends, and this sounds strange, but I think my connection to nature came through kind of roaming around kind of woods and even just the local parks by myself. I kind of was more friends with birds at that age than I was with people, and that's completely fine. I mean, I wasn't lonely or anything like that, and I used to go off into my little kind of fantasy world, and I remember one of my first kind of connections with nature is I found these little duck eggs in the local park, and these young boys, probably around my age as well, 7 or 8, were trying to destroy them, and I became the protector of these duck eggs.
Wow.
And they unfortunately did destroy the duck eggs, and I remember that feeling, that absolute breaking point of like, oh my gosh, I need to protect the environment, and from that point, it kind of grew, and I've always had that passion of educating and inspiring people to want to protect nature as well. So whether, I can't remember writing that poem about the rhinos, but I was the leader of a green team at school, and I did songs and kind of creative assemblies in front of the school kids, and at that age, 11 or 12, no one was interested in the environment whatsoever. Yeah. So that's what I remember from that age, really.
I love that story so much. When you said roaming around by yourself, it reminds me of me when I was young as well, and I did a lot of roaming outside by myself. And I've heard this story before about how solo nature exploration lets you sink down deeply into the stillness of nature in a way that it's different from when you're roaming around in nature with your brothers and sisters or your friends. Do you feel that? Do you think that solo time in nature as a child is really important?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's benefits to both. I think when I went out with my sister, for example, or when obviously I did start having friends, it was more about what nature could do for me and the people I was with to make potions or kind of build dens. Whereas when you're by yourself, it's I find I'm more this sort of observer. I'm just watching nature, and that's still the same today. Obviously, we're going through a pandemic, and so my way of kind of coping in this time is going out into nature alone still, and having that silence and just watching it kind of pass by. It's still there. It's still going despite us stopping.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that all the time, how nature just continues. Here we are in this incredible, almost unprecedented crisis, and nature's just going along doing its thing.
Yeah, definitely is.
There's something really reassuring in that it's in the stability of it, in the constants of nature.
Yeah, yeah, and it's very adaptable. We are not the dictators of nature. I learned that at a very young age, other than the duck eggs being broken. But hopefully they had more.
Oh my goodness. So this passion for environment and environmental protection has come with you from childhood until now. And now you are in the field of graphic recording, and you record sustainability sessions at conferences, and you tell me all about graphic recording and your career in sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's quite ironic that graphic recording is such a jargon heavy word for something that is about using art to simplify jargon. So I find it quite ironic that it's but so what I do is I provide live drawing at conferences and events, and in the same way a translator would be simultaneously translating one language to another, I will be digesting, again, observing speakers, panel events, whatever it is, or if it's online, a webinar, and then translating that into visuals and some words to sum up the visuals in real time. And the result of that is key messages, but also you can see the links between different topics. You can see the paths forward. So that's graphic recording, and it's one lovely part of the way in which I use art to facilitate environmental change.
So sketchnoting is making its way into the nature journaling community, and I wonder if you could describe the difference between graphic recording and sketchnoting.
Oh, yes. So I think the first is the difference in scale. Okay. Sketchnoting, from my experience of sketchnoting, is you can sketchnote on a piece of paper the size of your hand. You could go into a meeting or even just watch a TED talk and sketchnote your observations, the key messages, and so on. Graphic recording is about it can be on a larger scale, so it can literally take up a whole wall space, which is what I really like. So huge kind of meter-long sheets of paper that you fill out throughout a day. Also, for graphic recording, there's another term called graphic facilitation, and that's kind of a different level to graphic recording. So it's while you're digesting the information, as you would for sketchnoting and graphic recording, you would group it mentally into themes. So let's say someone was talking about climate resilience and I don't know, the use of mangroves in climate adaptation or something like that. And you're like, there was a speaker earlier that spoke about the use of mangroves as biodiversity. Let's group those together in the same area of the page. So it then helps the audience see that connection between the two things. So you're thematically kind of analysing it at the same time. And that's I think the greater benefit of graphic recording or graphic facilitation compared to sketchnoting, which is more like minute taking.
Okay, and it can be for your personal knowledge gathering, or it can be for something external.
Absolutely. I mean, so I kind of read a statistic that 65% of us are visual learners. And I don't know about you, but when I was at school, my way of learning was using art, was using sketches, sketchnoting. So drawing comic strips of mitochondria and how they worked in the body, or I thankfully had a really lovely teacher that gave me a good mark for that, but I can guarantee if it was a different teacher they would have squashed my creativity.
Yes.
And yeah, I think anyone can do sketchnoting, and anyone can do graphic recording as well. It's I can talk more about kind of how to develop that skill, but if 65% of us are visual learners, then surely we need to capture this visual element of learning more.
Yeah, well, let's talk a bit about how art and visual communication has power above and beyond other communication tools, because we are such visual learners, and it can be super useful for creating environmental and social change. Do you want to talk about how you think visual communication increases public understanding and uptake of an idea over other forms of communication?
Okay, good question. I don't know if I believe it is over and above other forms of communication. I think it has a equal place to other forms of communication. I think that it depends on let's take anything to do with the environment. I mean, the environment, it's a global thing. Nature is so complex, climate change so complex. So with those sorts of topics, I do think visual communication is incredibly relevant. That doesn't mean there isn't a place for policy reports and written text and all other forms of communication, oral communication and so on. But what visual communication does is it's universal. Art is universal, and nature, climate, environment spans across countries, languages, cultures, different levels of literacy, all of this stuff. So it allows you to essentially walk shoulder to shoulder with people, and then not be that kind of I'm an expert, you're not element. And that's what I've seen at events using this, is that a lot of the events that I attend, or for example policy reports that I do illustrations for, the aim of them is to get dialogue across different stakeholder groups and different cultures, where it may be that the experts are illiterate female farmers in India, and they're not included in that written policy report because it's written in Hindi or English. And so by using art and universal icons, they have a voice. So yeah.
That's really powerful. I'd love to talk about how you actually go about it, like the process. If you're at a conference, you've done lots of conferences, one was for TEDx. Let's talk about your process, the tools you use, the steps you go through during the process of creating a graphic for a conference. So you might start off with a really big blank piece of cardboard. What happens next?
Oh, yes. So I think backtracking slightly, what happens before the conference is also really important. So,
okay, tell me.
And this is, for me, this determines whether I'm going to be able to do a good job in showing on the paper those visual themes that I spoke about earlier, instead of it just being this hodgepodge of like random visuals everywhere. And let's say I don't know what people are going to talk about. I mean, I don't see scripts or anything like that. But what I might get is a biography of the speaker. I might get the title of their talk. I might get the general theme of the conference. For example, I did one last year now, for the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission in the UK, and they're doing a series of consultations on land use, farming and food. And so I knew that they were looking at agroecological approaches to farming and land use. So I then structure the page on just a blank sheet of paper, A4 paper, so it's not the same size as what I'll be doing it in real life. And think, okay, the left-hand side, I'm going to focus on the sort of what's happening now. And then they'll probably talk about next steps. So I have to make sure that the bottom right-hand side of the page is left blank, so that if they talk about that, it's there. If not, I'll fill it in with something later. And so I'm predicting how they're going to structure their talk, so I can structure my visual accurately. And then before the event, so when I'm standing there, I think the most important thing for me is not to be a perfectionist.
Yes.
I'm assuming it's the same with nature journaling in general, that I am just the observer. I am a facilitator. I am not the expert. Nature is the expert in your case. For me, the experts are the people in the room that are talking about nature, and finding solutions to protect it. And so I just need to get out of self, to listen actively, and to just know that I have that foundation of structure from kind of what's on the left and right hand side of the board to help it flow. So yeah, getting out of self is the most important thing.
It makes me nervous just thinking about that process.
Oh, it can go wrong. I promise you.
Okay, that was one of my questions. What happens if it goes wrong? Because you're using like marker pens, right? You don't have a chance to... What do you do when you make a mistake?
Okay, so again, I think when you make a mistake, obviously as a perfectionist, I want to just rip the board up, throw it across the room. But obviously you're in the middle of this live event and you can't do anything. Like if you disrupt the event, you're screwed. So the times where it's gone wrong, let's say I miss out a letter in like the title. I remember missing out a letter in team building, and I was like, you know what? Okay, right. Here's something I can do. It was the M or something, so it said tea building instead, and I just put underneath the E, I put an M, and then a person lifting it up with other people. So I was able to kind of think about that. But there have been times where I used to draw caricatures of the people speaking, and it took up so much time where I should have been listening properly to what people were saying. And there were some of them, like, people went over to the boards and all they wanted to see was their likeness in caricature form, and that wasn't the point. So I stopped doing that. But there were some horrific experiences where I started like shading in, like, it went really wrong one time. And I just had to apologize and say, hey, I can edit this out of like any social media kind of use of this image. Once you start shading, you can't go back. That's all I know.
Oh, wow. Yeah, wow. So do you have a bit of a repertoire of visual symbols that you use? So if it's going to be a light bulb or whatever it is, do you have like symbols that you can draw on to use again and again?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that any graphic recorder or kind of illustrator will have a visual vocabulary that they will develop over time, and a really good way of practicing this is TED Talks. So if you go onto a TED Talk about anything that you're interested in, and you can start drawing kind of, let's say it's nature, so you just think of 20 symbols that relate to nature, and then try and use those throughout the TED Talk that you're trying to summarize. I think also, I am not an artist in the fine art sense. It is about speed. So my house is literally a box with four little L shapes as windows and a triangle on top, and that's enough. So, and the same with, I have a really quick way of drawing a cow and all of this. So it's developing it over time for sure.
Are you exhausted after a session from so much concentrating?
I'm buzzing, I think.
Okay, that's good.
I mean, you're stood up all the time, and I end up kind of right at the bottom of the graphic board. I'm usually squatting as well, like, because I'm quite tall, so I have a lot of snacks on hand and stuff. But the really beautiful thing about it is that once the sessions have finished, let's say there's a break or something, everyone will flock over, and this is why I do what I do, because you have there was one event that I did around forestry, and it's a huge government funded and kind of private investment forestry project, and it was 3 years, and you had people from Ghana there, you had people from I can't remember which Latin American country, but they were all there just congregating around this board and saying, oh my god, look, here's all the connections. And
that's what we said. Yeah.
So
that's
it was
a beautiful
great.
thing.
Yeah.
So inspiring. And I love the connection you made about listening actively, because as nature journalists, we really do that. And we might sit down with the intention to draw this particular flower, but then listening to nature, here comes this butterfly and he's perched here on this leaf, and that's where it goes, and you follow what's being said by nature when you're nature journaling. And I love that connection with active listening at a conference.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting though, because I will say that sometimes, obviously, because I do believe that nature can speak to us, but humans definitely can speak to us. So I remember I was at a conference once that I've been doing a few years in a row, and this man kept on coming over being like, make sure you draw, like, this speaker loves hedgehogs, please talk about the hedgehogs and stuff. So it meant that, like, other people can definitely come and input. And the really other kind of beautiful thing is that someone will have done a talk and they'll be like, of course she's going to draw something about, I don't know, this no-till agricultural practice, and instead they've said this like hilarious pun or quote, and I'm like, this is a fantastic visual.
Yes.
I'm going to draw this instead. And so I capture things that maybe people don't expect I'll capture, which is cool.
How do you decide what to put in and what to leave out? It must take so much focus in the moment and split second decisions, like, okay, I'm going to go with that instead of that. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Practice is the number one thing. Like I said, when just sketchnoting or kind of trying to just minute take in visual form, it definitely is about, I used to just literally draw everything and anything. But over time, post-it notes have really helped. So if I hear something, I'm like, that's a really cool thing, but maybe it's not that relevant, but I'll put it on a post-it note, stick it in the area of the board that I'm like, I think that should go there. And then I'll go back to it later if I want to include it.
That's interesting. Oh, I'm so impressed with the work you do. I'm very easily stressed. Like, I get stressed about stuff and stressed in like on the spot sort of situations. So I'm just wildly impressed with what you do.
Oh, same with you. And I think that, I mean, it's all about that connection between, I don't know, our passions and skills. I mean, both of us have this passion for nature and the environment, and like I said, 65% of us are visual learners, but I didn't realize that it was a unique skill to be able to synthesize information so quickly into a visual form and then put it on a page. And being able to, like, it is so stressful. I'm a perfectionist, and if I get in my way, I cannot do it. There have been times where I've been frozen at my board because of fear. Like, I've missed 3 minutes of the talk, and it's everything's gone wrong in my head. And but I just have to go back to, I am just being me. I am combining a passion which I've had since I was a young girl with this unique skill that I can't compare it to anything else. I am not better than or less than anyone. I'm just doing what I know to do. So that helps with the stress.
Tell me the story of how this started. How did you come to this career?
I don't know if anyone has a linear kind of realization of these sorts of career paths. I mean, the best analogy is this idea of like planting seeds, that I think throughout my 20s, series of seeds were planted, and then this kind of eureka moment happened in 2016 and 2017. So I founded EnviroVisuals in 2017. I think the first one was was I worked in international development, and did a lot of research into agriculture and sustainability, particularly in Madagascar and in India. And when I was in Madagascar, we were looking at forestry projects and the impact of a particular carbon forestry scheme on local livelihoods. And I was trekking kind of 14 kilometers a day to have interviews with people, and I got to speak to this elder of this village or this tiny little hamlet, and he took me to this dried riverbed, and I was like, can you map out your land use zones? And he was like, well, our land use zones are mapped out by the zebu tracks, so the cow tracks around our village. So don't really have kind of demarcated land boundaries. And I'm there like as this Westerner, like so confused by this notion. I had like a pen and paper like ready for him to show me his exact boundaries. And instead what he got a stick and some stones and sat on this dried riverbed with me and just mapped it out using art, so both of us could understand. He drew this kind of riverbed using this stick and indented into the riverbed, and that was, I think, one of the first kind of seeds that was planted of like this creative use of art and nature combined to facilitate a conversation between two people from entirely different cultures and concepts of land use. And my whole research project was influenced by that. The conclusions I came to was, so that was the first seed. And the second one was in India, where I think I mentioned earlier I was doing research into seed systems in rural India, and the experts were illiterate female farmers, and their voices weren't currently being included within written policy reports. And I witnessed a focus group where this charity used visual icons of rainfall, pests, climate change, just like water drops and a crop kind of on a piece of paper. And these women would kind of say, okay, well, they'd show whether rainfall had increased or decreased just using these visuals. So they were able, again, to give their voice, their expertise and their experience to the research project and to the charity. And then when I came back to England in 2016, I think I started doing an environmental leadership program as part of a charity called Uprising. And while I was there, you spoke about getting stressed. Like I'd been abroad for like 3 years. I couldn't find a job for the life of me. I was like, oh my gosh, there's nothing out there. I was doing an employability scheme. I found it quite hard to integrate myself back into like kind of, I moved to London for the first time, and I was suffering definitely from anxiety, I would say. And I was going to these big talks, and my way of kind of listening and coping with that was to sketchnote and to doodle during the talks, and afterwards people would come over and be like, wow, you've captured this so well. And so those three things, seeing that power of like how to capture people's voices and like facilitate change, but also that I'm able to do that even when anxious myself. Yes. And people come over and want to have a conversation. That's when EnviroVisuals was born. I think that, wow, I could actually do something with this and not be the voice, not be the academic expert, but yeah, facilitate.
I love that. Wow. Such an amazing beginning, like such an amazing inspiration taken from those two situations when you were, looking for communication channels, and art was the way. Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
When working in the sustainability sector, as you do, it can be easy to get overwhelmed by the enormity of the problems that we're facing, the devastation we've wreaked on the earth. I'm wondering, do you have a personal practice for processing like environmental anxiety, environmental grief?
Yes. It's a really good question. And I think as with any sort of emotional process, I have good and bad weeks, but you'll catch me on a good week. So I think that I mean, going back to when I was kind of leading this green team at school, and I should say there was another leader as well called Roberta, and she was very good as well. So I co-led this green team. No one was interested, and then in 2016 I did this plastic pollution campaign using EnviroVisuals art, and we had a launch event and no one turned up whatsoever. And I think at that stage, that kind of climate anxiety, or that idea of like, why is no one interested in any of this? Why is no one inspired? And what I realized is that me forcing again, academic jargon or kind of doom and gloom down people's throats does not work. And show kind of, I'm sure you've probably heard of David Attenborough, and his documentaries then meant that everybody became aware of plastic pollution around a year after I did this event. And since then, what I have noticed is a huge shift in the type of communication. It's all about inspiring people. It's about getting down to layman's terms. It's about bringing people together. So I do have a lot more hope in the way in which we're using communication to outreach around climate change and biodiversity loss. In terms of my own personal practice, I think my mantra is keep it simple, because I can be paralyzed if I feel like I have to do everything. I take my skills. So for me, I'm creative, and I use that to do something. Whether that is, I've started making a range of sustainability tea towels, which are just really simple visualizations of research I've done, like how to improve biodiversity in your backyard. I take website information from some source and then I just make it into a tea towel. It gives me that sense of therapy, because I'm able to do some art and get out of my head, but also hopefully educates and inspires people, instead of just like, we're all gonna die kind of, which I can go into. My husband can attest that we can stand in a supermarket aisle and I'll be like, I don't know what coffee to choose, everything is wrong. For sure.
Yeah, it really can be paralyzing, can't it? Like, I've done the same thing. Like, I've looked at something that I've purchased and you suddenly get this feeling, like this heavy feeling of, this thing is going to last. It's just not going to biodegrade. It's just going to sit there. Or the thought that every single toothbrush that you've ever owned still exists out there in the soil. And yeah, it can be like, it's a visceral feeling. I have it like almost daily, like, oh gee, this thing that I've contributed to the mess that we're in.
Yeah, but you can also contribute to the solution. And I think
yes,
I've been aware of environmental issues for a very long time, but it's been, as I kind of mentioned, that solo kind of journey, or definitely not solo, but I felt a little bit alone at times. And now, like, take my husband as an example. Like, all I know is that we've got so many posters up around our house of like me using illustration and kind of this graphic recording kind of sketchnoting style to showcase how to reuse things or recycle and how to sterilize a jar. And yes, he probably would rather have a poster of his favorite musician up on the wall, but he's inspired. He's inspired.
Yes, so it can be a loop. We can inspire each other as well, like the people around us. And when one person starts doing something like aiming for zero waste, even though that is really unattainable or like difficult to attain for a lot of people, like even making steps towards it, then the people that you live with can think, oh, okay, maybe I should do something like that. Or we can sort of feed off each other's positive actions.
Absolutely. And I think hanging around with like-minded people really helps as well. Knowing that not everything rests on my shoulders. It would be pretty egotistical of me to think that the whole of climate change and all of the biodiversity crises and threats in this world are all down to me. So
it's interesting. I've got a 4-year-old boy and I don't want to burden him with things, but sometimes he asks, what's climate change? Or why can't I, sometimes I'll say, I don't want to buy this, there's too much packaging. And then he'll ask why, what does that mean? And then you have to sort of explain a little bit, but not too much. I don't want him to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, but also I want him to have like some knowledge about it so that he can make good choices. I find that a difficult balance.
Yeah, I call it the kind of compassionate middle ground, and I think compassionate is definitely the first word. As you mentioned earlier, I mean, let's take the zero waste lifestyle. One of the tea towels that I did recently was on kind of sustainability swaps, and I actively chose not to do one on kind of zero waste, and I am in awe of people that do that. I really am. I tried it and it nearly broke me. So I have to remind myself it's the compassionate middle ground. And it's I so get you with how much information do you give to kind of not just create this atmosphere of fear, but an atmosphere of compassion and that we're all in it together.
Yes. Yeah. And that steps do make a difference. Like, I don't want him to feel like, we're doomed. He likes to say that. He heard it in a book. And so sometimes, not about this, but he sometimes says, I'm doomed. Yeah, I don't want him to feel like doomed, but that we can make changes. We can do these small things and they do make a difference.
Yeah, there's this amazing organization called Count Us In, or it's a campaign, and it's all about kind of reducing your carbon footprint, but also looking at the impact and also the effort. And I did a graph of kind of these different steps based on those two variables to see, okay, which ones actually are the most impactful and maybe least effort, and kind of it made me realize that there's so much focus on things like going to the bulk food store. I go and get my groceries from this local grocers, but I have to remind myself that a lot of that, having looked at the impact, it's fantastic to do that, but maybe the highest impact thing would be for me to actually just turn my thermostat down by 1 degree. And that would likely have more of an impact to my carbon footprint than buying local food from this grocer's, because I don't actually know if it is local or not. But it's the intersectionality. I'm supporting a local business. I'm getting outside, which is a really important thing at the moment. And all of that, and all of it needs to come into play. Turning my thermostat down doesn't exactly bring me joy, whereas supporting a local business does. Yeah.
Yes. It's about awareness. It's about small steps in the right direction. And so interesting. Tell me about how the pandemic's changed your work. I guess you can't go to conferences anymore.
No. I think it's coming up to the anniversary of my last conference that was live. And it's really bad because it was a 3 kind of series conference, series of conferences, and so I left my easel and everything at the venue thinking, oh, well, I'll just be going back there in March. And I haven't gone back. And I think they're shut now. So thankfully, I obviously haven't needed an easel and large boards to draw on. I don't know how and why, but I am not really that tech savvy. And around 3 weeks before lockdown started, I had saved up all year to get an iPad, and I finally got one. And I am so grateful because everything that I do has shifted to digital. So as again, these kind of series of events led to me shifting everything to digital, but also starting to provide more illustrations than the live graphic recording. And like I said, also now designing sustainability tea towels. So I've diversified my business. I have also continued to try and practice pen and paper drawing, because I do think, as I'm sure you will relate, that it just feels better. being on an
Yes.
iPad is fantastic, and I have done some amazing things. One of my favorite ones in the last year was in the UK, there's a kind of campaign for children's right to food and free school meals. And a footballer called Marcus Rashford has been kind of like spearheading this campaign, and I was able to work with the charity that was behind this campaign and provide infographics and visuals on children's right to food, and they were able to animate them, and it was all really cool. Like, I couldn't have done that without an iPad. But I need to get out into nature. I need to draw. I need to listen to TED Talks and doodle in a notepad as well, or else that love for what I do can sometimes dissipate if I don't keep it up. It's a passion. It's not just work.
Yes, yes, yes. You mentioned before about how someone might start doing this themselves, maybe in their nature journal or in some other wider context. I'd love to hear some little tips about how someone could get started.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anyone that is a nature journalist could easily be a graphic recorder, or kind of do illustration in a wider sense. I mean, science illustration is essentially kind of sketchnoting in a way. You'd just be taking your illustrations and adding some sentences below it or some key quotes and so on. So anyone can do it. You don't need to be the best artist either, which is the good thing. And my suggestions would be to find a course. There are loads of, particularly online now, graphic recording courses where they teach you how to create that visual vocabulary I spoke about earlier, how to draw fast, and how to synthesize information. And I do think that, I mean, EnviroVisuals is obviously around kind of sustainability because I have a background in that, and I know a lot of graphic recorders that do a broader remit, so they will literally go to any sort of client, and I quite like the comfort of knowing the subject matter that I'm drawing.
Yes.
So, I mean, you have all the foundations. You have the art skill, you have the connection to nature and environment, you have the kind of knowledge, and it's just about not being a perfectionist, redefining what art means, because it will not be the same as a beautiful woodpecker drawing or like whatever.
Yes.
So do the course and then practice. Use TED Talks online. There's great forums on Facebook. I'm happy to connect with anyone that's interested. There was someone that attended one of the events that I drew at, and they've now become a graphic recorder in their field.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Super inspiring. What are your hopes for EnviroVisuals in the future? What are your hopes and dreams?
It's a very good question. I think one of the things that I am very lucky to have is because I am in the field of sustainability. A lot of my work comes from word of mouth, and I think my hopes for EnviroVisuals are to be able to tap into potentially sectors that I haven't interacted with so far. So, for example, when I started EnviroVisuals, just 3-4 years ago, pretty much all of my clients were charities, grassroots organizations, campaign groups, individual PhD students, and I have a suspicion that kind of corporate sector, so banks, energy companies and so on, anyone that has a net zero agenda, anyone that's looking at biodiversity crises, will be needing, hopefully, a visual platform for showcasing their projects and seeing the paths forward. Whether they appreciate the visual form of communication is a different thing. So maybe my hope is to tap into those and inspire that particular kind of stakeholder group to see the power of visuals in their work. I think it's much more the charity sector at the moment, like culture and arts and
Yes. Oh, I wish you every success. You're just completely inspiring. I'm so happy to talk with you.
Yeah, you too. I could talk all night or day.
So you mentioned sustainability infographics on tea towels. People can find them on your website. Can you talk about the best places people can find you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So people can find me on Instagram, and the handle is just EnviroVisuals. And I also have a website. It's enviro-visuals.co.uk, and that has kind of a link to an Etsy site where I have a few tea towels left. They've been far more successful than I thought they would be, so they're nearly all sold out, but
Great.
I'm hoping to design some more. And yeah, if you have any ideas of new designs, let me know.
Yes.
So that's where to find me, and Twitter, but I'm not very good. Maybe that's another hope for me, becoming more marketing minded. Yeah.
I'm on Twitter too, but I'm just so confused when I'm there that I don't really do much.
I need someone that's as passionate as I am about art as they are about social media, because I am not good at social
to be your social media manager.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for talking with me. It's been amazing, so inspiring. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you.
I enjoyed speaking with Rebecca so much. I hope you enjoyed it too. I love the story she told of how she began to see the power of visual communication when an elder in Madagascar mapped out the land use zones on a dried riverbed using a stick and some stones, showing how art and nature could bridge their differences in culture and concepts of land use. I thought that was a really powerful story and a window into how Rebecca came to realize the importance of art and visual communication. Please follow the links in the show notes for this episode to find Rebecca's website and social media. She has lots of examples of her work online and also photos of her graphic recording at live conferences on huge pieces of cardboard. Gosh, I'm so impressed. Be sure to take a look. I'd love to take this moment to also say thank you to the folks supporting the Journaling with Nature podcast on Patreon and also by donation. Your support helps so much in keeping this project possible. If you'd like to join us on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/journalingwithnature or follow the link in the show notes. You can join for as little as $1 per month, and every contribution is deeply appreciated. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.